It was a cool autumn evening when Angela Brooks finished her work at the local community center. The sky was fading into a soft purple as the sun set behind the trees. Angela, a confident and kind-hearted woman in her early 30s, had just spent the last few hours mentoring young students and speaking about leadership and justice. As usual, she wore a neat navy blue blazer, her ID badge clipped to her lapel. People respected her wherever she went, not just for her intelligence, but for the calm, respectful way she treated everyone. Angela stepped into her car and turned, on the radio, enjoying a bit of jazz as she made her way home. She lived just 20 minutes away in a quiet part of town. The road was mostly empty, except for a few cars passing now and then. She obeyed every traffic rule, driving the speed limit, signaling when she turned and stopping fully at every sign. As she came to a red light, she noticed a police car pull up behind her. She didn't think much of it. She had nothing to hide, after all. But as soon as the light turned green and she continued driving, the red and blue lights flashed behind her. She glanced in her mirror. The siren followed quickly. Angela signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. She reached into her glove box to get her license and registration, keeping her hands visible. She had spoken at many events about how to stay calm during a traffic stop. Now she reminded herself to take her own advice. The officer stepped out of his car. He was tall, looked to be in his early 40s, and walked with a certain air of confidence. His name tag read Officer M. Daniels. He approached her window, not with a greeting, but with a question that came across cold and sharp. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. Angela answered politely. "From the community center. Downtown. I was speaking at a student event." "Student event?" he repeated, his tone skeptical. "You got any proof of that?" "Yes," Angela replied calmly. She showed him the ID badge clipped to her jacket and pointed to the flyers on the passenger seat, still fresh from the event. Daniels didn't seem satisfied. He asked her to step out of the vehicle. "Officer, may I ask why I've been stopped?" she said, gently but firmly. "You matched a description," he said quickly, without explaining further. Angela stepped out of the car as asked. She stood straight, her hands relaxed at her sides, showing no signs of fear, but also no disrespect. Daniels glanced inside her car. "You traveling alone?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Just heading home." He then asked her to place her hands on the hood of the car, saying it was for his safety. Angela hesitated. "Officer, I'd like to cooperate fully, but may I ask if I'm being detained or arrested?" Daniels looked at her for a moment before muttering something under his breath and reaching for his radio. Another patrol car pulled up. A younger officer stepped out, looked at the scene and paused as if unsure whether this stop made any sense. Angela tried again. "I don't mean any trouble. I just want to understand why I'm being held here." Daniels didn't respond directly. Instead, he asked the second officer to stand by, then asked Angela to hand over her bag. "I'd prefer not to hand over personal belongings without a clear reason," she said. Her tone was firm, but calm. That's when Daniel's mood seemed to change. He appeared annoyed by her quiet confidence, as if he wasn't used to being questioned. He told the younger officer, "We're bringing her in." "She's being difficult." Angela blinked, surprised. "I'm sorry, sir, but I haven't done anything wrong. I'm cooperating." Even the younger officer looked uneasy, but he followed orders. They led Angela to the back seat of the patrol car. She didn't argue or resist. She simply sat with her back straight, her expression unreadable. The ride to the station was silent. Angela stared out the window, her mind running over the events. She knew her rights. She had done nothing wrong. And yet here she was, sitting in the back of a police car, her evening turned upside down. At the station, the officers brought her inside and asked her to sit in a waiting area. She noticed two other people in the room, another officer typing at a desk and a woman who looked like she worked the front counter. Neither of them seemed to know why she had been brought in. Angela looked around. The place was clean but cold, the walls a dull gray. She folded her hands in her lap and waited quietly. Officer Daniels returned a few minutes later holding a notepad. He asked her more questions about where she lived, where she worked, what she was doing out so late. Angela answered each question, clearly and politely. "I still don't understand why I'm here," she said softly. Daniels didn't explain. He seemed more interested in testing her patience than in listening to her words. Eventually, he asked her to come into another room. "We'll need to take a few more details," he said. Angela stood up and followed him, her heels clicking softly on the floor. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that the truth was on her side. And what Daniels didn't know, at least not yet, was that the woman he had just brought in wasn't just any speaker from a community event. She held a title that would change the entire story in a matter of minutes. Angela followed Officer Daniels down a quiet hallway inside the police station. The sound of her shoes echoed softly on the floor. Though she had done nothing wrong, she felt the eyes of others in the building watching her. Some were curious, some unsure, but no one said a word. The room she was led into was small and cold, with a metal table and 2 chairs. There was a camera in the corner, quietly recording everything. Officer Daniels motioned for her to sit, and she did so without protest. He sat across from her and placed a small notepad on the table. Angela could feel the tension in the room, though she remained calm. She wasn't someone who easily lost her cool, even in uncomfortable situations. Years of courtroom work had taught her the value of patience and of silence when words could be twisted. Daniels leaned forward slightly and asked her again for her name and reason for being out that night. Angela repeated her answers exactly as before. She had come from a youth leadership event where she was the keynote speaker. She gave him the same name, the same address, and even described the building where the event took place. Still, he looked at her like she was holding something back. He wrote something on his notepad, then asked, "And what do you do for a living?" Angela paused. She chose not to reveal her full title yet. She wasn't hiding. She just didn't want to lead with her position. Sometimes revealing too much too soon changed people's behavior in ways that weren't honest. "I work in law," she said simply. Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Law, huh? You a lawyer?" "Yes," she said. "I have experience in that area." He smirked as if he didn't believe her. "Must be nice," he said, scribbling again. "You always drive that kind of car?" Angela nodded. "It's the car I use for work and daily travel." Daniels stood and walked to the corner of the room. He picked up a folder and flipped through it, then came back to the table. "See, something isn't adding up," he said. "You say you're just coming from a speech dressed all professional, and yet you act like you've got something to hide." Angela tilted her head slightly. "I haven't hidden anything. I answered your questions truthfully." He stared at her for a moment. "Why didn't you hand over your bag when I asked?" Angela replied, "I believe I have the right to keep my personal belongings unless there is a legal reason to search them. I said I'd be happy to cooperate with a supervisor present." Daniels didn't answer right away. He sat down again, leaned back in his chair, and tapped his pen on the table. The silence between them stretched longer this time. Angela remained still. She knew moments like this could go in many directions, and she wasn't going to rush it. After a few moments, another officer entered the room. He was younger, with a calm face and polite manner. "Sir," he said quietly to Daniels, "you might want to come out here for a second." Daniels frowned. "Why?" "There's someone on the phone asking for Ms. Brooks. It sounds important?" Daniels gave Angela a quick look and then walked out. Angela sat quietly, folding her hands in her lap. She had a feeling she knew what was happening, but she didn't move or speak. Outside the room, voices could be heard through the door, though the words weren't clear. Then came silence again. Minutes passed. When Daniels returned, his face had changed. The confidence, or perhaps the control he had earlier, seemed to fade just slightly. He looked at Angela again, this time more carefully. He sat back down and cleared his throat. "So, you said you work in law. Anything else you'd like to add to that?" Angela looked directly at him. Her tone was even and respectful. I'm a federal judge. I oversee cases related to civil rights and legal conduct, and I was invited to that youth event tonight by the city council. Daniels blinked. He didn't speak for several seconds. It was clear the title hit him in a way he hadn't expected. The woman sitting calmly across from him wasn't just a professional. She held a position of great responsibility, one that required integrity, intelligence, and the highest level of trust. He opened his mouth to speak but then closed it again. He looked down at his notes, then back at Angela. "Why didn't you say that earlier?" Angela smiled slightly. "Because my job doesn't change the facts. Whether I'm a judge or not, I should be treated with fairness, just like anyone else." Daniel sat back in his chair. He seemed unsure what to say next. There was a quiet knock on the door. The younger officer returned, this time with a paper in hand. "Captain wants to speak with you," he said to Daniels. "Right away." Daniels stood up slowly and left the room. Angela remained seated. She knew the next part of the evening would unfold differently now. Things were starting to shift, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed what happened. The younger officer gave her a respectful nod. "Can I get you some water, ma'am?" Angela thanked him. The air in the room felt a little lighter now, but the weight of the moment still hung there. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't argued. She had let the truth speak for itself, and now it was being heard. Angela sat alone in the small room, sipping water slowly from a paper cup. The clock on the wall ticked softly, the sound filling the quiet space. She didn't feel nervous or angry. Instead, she sat still, patient and thoughtful. Her mind wasn't just on herself. She was thinking about all the others who had probably sat in that same room, who didn't have her title or her voice, and who might not have been treated as calmly as she had been. Moments later, the door opened again. Officer Daniels stepped in, but his body language had completely changed. His shoulders weren't as straight. His voice wasn't as sharp. He walked in slowly and stood across the room from Angela, holding a file he didn't bother to open. He cleared his throat and spoke. "Judge Brooks, I didn't realize who you were." His words came slowly, carefully. Angela looked up and met his eyes. "That's all right," she said, her voice calm. "You weren't supposed to treat me any differently." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "I apologize if things got out of hand. We were just trying to follow procedure." Angela studied him for a moment. "Were you?" she asked gently. "Or did you decide something about me before asking the right questions?" Daniels didn't respond right away. He looked down at the floor, then back up at her. "Sometimes things move fast. Out there, it's not always easy to judge what's going on." Angela gave a slight nod. "That's true, but that's why training matters. That's why how we treat people matters." I was polite. I answered every question. And yet somehow, I ended up in a small room, being questioned without cause. Daniels looked uncomfortable again, as if the truth was sitting heavily in the room. Before he could say more, another door opened. This time it was the station captain, a tall man with a calm presence and a respectful tone. "Judge Brooks," the captain said as he entered, "I want to sincerely apologize for this evening. Once we were informed of who you are and what happened, I reviewed the early report myself. I assure you this is being taken seriously." Angela stood, holding her bag now that it had been returned. She looked at the captain, appreciating his polite and measured tone. "Thank you, but again, this isn't just about me. What happened here tonight could have happened to anyone, and that should matter." The captain nodded. "Yes, ma'am, we agree. That's why there will be an internal review starting first thing tomorrow." Angela paused, then asked, "And what happens when it's someone without a title or platform to call attention to this? What about them?" The room was quiet for a moment. No one had an easy answer. Angela then turned to Daniels. "I don't want an apology just because of who I am. I want it because you understand why this situation was unfair and why it shouldn't have happened." Daniels took a deep breath. "You're right. I made assumptions. I let judgment lead instead of patience." and I'll accept whatever comes from the review." Angela didn't smile, but her expression softened slightly. She appreciated honesty more than perfection. People made mistakes. It was how they handled them that showed who they really were. The captain offered to escort her to the lobby. They walked down the hallway. Other officers passed by, some recognizing her, some curious. But Angela didn't carry herself with pride or anger. She simply walked with the same grace and quiet strength she always had. At the front desk, a young officer stood and opened the door for her. Angela turned back and looked at the captain. "I hope something good comes from this," she said. He nodded. "We'll make sure it does." Outside, the night air was still cool. Angela pulled her coat around her and took a deep breath. The street was quiet. A few people walked by, not knowing anything about what had just happened inside. She unlocked her car and sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting it. The engine hummed softly, and the jazz music from earlier played faintly through the speakers. She stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Even with all her accomplishments, her titles, and her work, tonight reminded her that not everyone sees past the surface. To some people, she was just another stranger, another person they didn't understand. That was a painful truth, but it was also why her work mattered more than ever. She drove home slowly, passing familiar streets and landmarks. The houses were dark and quiet. Most people were asleep, unaware of how one small decision could have changed a person's life. As she pulled into her driveway and turned off the car, she sat in the silence for a while. The porch light glowed warmly, welcoming her home. She finally stepped out, walked up the steps, and unlocked her front door. Inside, the house was still and peaceful. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat on the couch. Her phone buzzed, a message from her assistant asking if she was all right. She replied with a simple, "Home now. We'll call in the morning. Thank you." Then she set the phone aside and looked out the window. Tomorrow would bring more work, more cases, and more chances to speak up, not just for herself but for others who couldn't. Tonight had tested her patience, but it also reminded her of her purpose. The next morning, sunlight filled Angela's living room as she sat at her dining table, a warm cup of tea in her hand. The events from the night before were still fresh in her mind, but she didn't feel angry. She felt something deeper, a sense of responsibility. It wasn't just about what happened to her. It was about what happened every day to people who didn't have a title, a platform, or a way to speak out. She had experienced a glimpse of what so many others had gone through silently, and she knew she couldn't let it end with silence. She picked up her phone and called her assistant. "Good morning," Angela said calmly. "Can you arrange a press statement for this afternoon? I'd like to speak about something important." Her assistant, always quick and thoughtful, responded, "Of course. Should I notify the local stations too?" "Yes," Angela replied. "Let's make sure the message is heard beyond just one building." By noon, word had started to spread. A few reporters who had covered her work in the past arrived outside the community center where she had spoken just the day before. She stood on the same steps wearing the same calm expression, but today her message would be different. The reporters adjusted their microphones and cameras as Angela stepped forward. She didn't hold any notes. She spoke from the heart. "Good afternoon," she began. "As some of you may know, I was involved in an unexpected situation at a local police station last night. Though I was not harmed and was allowed to leave, I believe it's important to speak openly about what happened." The crowd listened closely. Angela continued. "I was stopped while driving home after an event. I was questioned, brought in, and treated with suspicion. I remained calm and respectful, but I was not treated fairly." She paused for a moment, letting the words settle. Then she added, "Only after my title was revealed did the tone of the conversation change. That should not be the standard." Some people in the crowd nodded. Others whispered quietly to each other. Angela looked across their faces. "I am not here to speak only about myself. I am here because what happened to me happens to others, people who may not have a badge or a title to protect them. It is for them that I speak today." Her voice remained steady, but there was a quiet strength in every word. She wasn't trying to blame anyone. She was trying to light a path forward. We all want to believe that our communities are built on trust and fairness, she said. But trust must be earned. And fairness must be practiced every day, not just when someone is important or well-known or powerful. Reporters asked questions. One wanted to know if she would press any charges. Another asked if she would name the officer. Angela shook her head gently. This is not about punishment. It is about progress. The officer and the station are now under review, and I trust the process. What I care about is that this moment is used to learn, not just for one person, but for the whole system. She ended the statement with a clear message. Let this be the start of a larger conversation. Let this be the reminder that we still have work to do, and let us never forget to treat every person with the dignity they deserve, no matter their name, their background, or their title. The cameras clicked. Reporters sent live updates. And within hours, Angela's words were spreading across social media and local news. People were sharing clips of her speech with comments like, strong, wise, and brave, and this is what leadership looks like. Back at the police station, the mood was different. Officer Daniels sat quietly at his desk, looking over reports but clearly distracted. He had watched the press conference online. Hearing Angela's calm, respectful message made him reflect more than anything else had. He realized now that he hadn't truly listened the night before. He had assumed. He had rushed. He had let his own ideas get in the way of patience. And now, the whole city knew what had happened. But what struck him most wasn't the attention. It was the way Angela handled it with dignity, without anger, and with a focus on change, not blame. He respected that more than he could say. Meanwhile, the station captain began the internal review just as promised. Officers were asked to reflect on how they handled stops and interactions with the public. Training sessions were scheduled to focus more on fairness, empathy, and better communication. Angela didn't stop there. She met with city leaders, school administrators, and community groups. She spoke about her experience not as a victim, but as a witness to a problem that needed care and correction. At one town meeting, a teenager raised his hand and asked, "Do you think things will actually change?" Angela smiled gently and said, "Change doesn't happen all at once. It happens when people speak up with respect, when leaders listen, and when we keep trying, no matter how long it takes." Her story reached even more people. A national news outlet picked it up. She was invited to speak on radio programs and panels. But through it all, Angela kept her message focused. Justice, fairness, and respect should be for everyone, not just the few. And as more people listened, more people began to care. A few weeks had passed since that unexpected night at the police station. Life around the city slowly returned to its regular rhythm, but something was different. Conversations were happening, in coffee shops, at schools, in living rooms, and inside government buildings. People were talking about fairness, responsibility, and the importance of treating others with dignity, no matter who they were. Angela Brooks continued her work as a federal judge with the same calm focus she was known for. But now people didn't just see her as a judge. They saw her as a voice for truth, someone who had taken a difficult experience and used it to bring light to a bigger issue. In the days following her public statement, Angela received hundreds of letters and emails. Some were from strangers who simply wanted to say, "Thank you." Others came from people who had faced similar experiences but never had the chance to speak out. A young college student wrote, "Your story gave me courage. I've been silent for too long." A mother from another city shared, "I hope my children grow up in a world where people like you lead the way." Angela read each message with care. She couldn't respond to all of them, but she carried their words with her. The city leaders invited her to lead a community discussion called Respect in Action. It was a roundtable event that brought together law enforcement, teachers, students, and everyday residents. Angela sat at the center of the group, not to lecture but to listen, to guide, and to encourage honest conversation. One officer at the event raised his hand and said, "Sometimes we forget how much power we Hold just by wearing this badge. Your experience reminded me how important it is to slow down and see the person, not just the situation. Angela nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly it, she replied. Sometimes the difference between fear and trust is just one respectful word. One kind question instead of a quick judgment. The room was quiet for a moment as people thought about how true that was. The officer who had brought her in that night, Officer Daniels, had also been invited to the event. At first, he wasn't sure if he should attend, but something inside him told him it was time, not to defend himself but to listen and grow. When it was his turn to speak, Daniels stood up slowly. I made a mistake that night, he said, his voice low but steady. I didn't stop to think, I just assumed. I'm sorry for that. I've learned more from this experience than I ever did in training. Angela looked at him and gave a small nod. Thank you for saying that, she said. Owning our mistakes is how we move forward. We all have room to learn. The people in the room didn't clap or cheer, they didn't need to. The moment spoke louder than applause. It was a step toward better understanding. Following the event, the City Council approved a new program focused on community trust. It included listening sessions, regular public talks with police officers, and a system where people could give feedback without fear. Angela helped shape the program but made it clear that it should belong to the people, not to her. This isn't about one person's story, she said in a meeting. It's about the thousands of quiet stories that haven't been told yet. Let's make sure they're not ignored anymore. Angela also returned to the youth center where she had spoken before the incident. This time, the students had questions. Were you scared? A young girl asked. Angela paused and answered honestly. I wasn't scared for myself. I was more worried about how many others go through something similar and don't get a chance to be heard. That's what stayed with me. A boy in the back raised his hand. If that ever happens to one of us, what should we do? Angela smiled, gently. Stay calm. Know your rights. Speak with respect, and ask for help if you need it. And no matter what, don't lose your voice. These moments meant everything to her. Not the news attention, not the headlines, but these honest talks, where truth could grow and understanding could begin. Eventually, the headlines faded. New stories took over the news. But the change Angela helped spark remained. The officer training sessions continued. The community events grew. And people started to notice a shift. Not perfect, not instant, but real. Angela, too, returned to her normal schedule. She heard cases, wrote decisions, and continued to serve with quiet wisdom. But something inside her had changed. She felt even more connected to the people she served. She knew that justice wasn't just something written in books. It was something lived out every day, in the streets, in conversations, in the smallest decisions. One quiet evening, as she sat on her porch with a book and a cup of tea, her phone buzzed. It was a message from a mother she'd met at one of the talks. Thank you. My son wants to be a lawyer now because of your story. Angela smiled softly. She looked out at the sky, the stars just beginning to appear. That one difficult night had opened a door to something far greater. Not because of anger or shame or fear, but because she chose respect, truth, and the belief that change is possible. And sometimes, that's all it takes to begin something powerful.